So, hello and welcome to the first edition of Heads Up, a new series by ISC Research where we'll be keeping you informed of the latest trends happening in the international schools market. My name's Sam Fraser and I'm Research Director at ISC Research. Today we're talking about insights from our new teaching and learning research conducted in April this year. A report is now available sharing all the results of this research along with conclusions and recommendations. So if you want to get yourself a copy of that report, visit iscforschools.com/teaching and learning. And yeah, you can get yourself your report there. I'd like to firstly thank Education Horizons Group for supporting the production of the report, allowing it to be freely available to everyone. We've been supported in the research, analysis and writing of the report by Dr. Kristen Weatherby, who joins me today. Dr. Weatherby's a seasoned researcher and consultant in education technology and in teacher policy. Experience includes time at UCL Institution of Education in London and at the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, i.e. the OECD. So welcome to you, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining me today, given your no doubt very busy schedule. So I guess my first question is to you, how are you?
Thanks, Sam. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm absolutely fine and enjoyed working on this project immensely. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about it.
Excellent. Whereabouts are you today?
I'm in Oxfordshire, in my home office in Oxfordshire.
Oh, perfect. Well, yeah. I'm actually not too far away from you, over in Gloucestershire. Okay. I'd normally be found in Kazakhstan, but I'm back in the UK.
Oh wow!
So, yeah. So there you go. All right. Well, let's start by looking at the transition to blended and hybrid learning then. So my experience personally at school was very kind of heavily teacher-led, followed by regurgitation. And since researching the international schools market over the last few years, I've seen a sharp increase in ways of enhancing student engagement. So you'll see two approaches defined here on the slide. And for those of you that are listening audio only, those are blended learning, i.e. supplementing in-person teaching with online resources, and hybrid learning, allowing some content to be learned entirely online at a student's own pace. Now, I'm not going to say these are new learning methods, but the number of schools offering a blended or hybrid approach has definitely increased dramatically due to the catalyst that is COVID. The market's changed in many other ways too. And I'm eager to ask you firstly, Kristen, what results have you found of most interest within this research relating to changes due to COVID?
Well, one of the things that I actually found the most interesting was not a change, but it was something that was happening already. And so one of the most common pedagogies with blended or hybrid learning is this idea of a flipped classroom approach. And that is that, rather than a teacher delivering content or a lecture or something like that in class and then giving students homework where they go home and they use that content by themselves, a flipped classroom approach, for those of you that don't know it, happens when it's kind of reversed. So content is delivered while the student is at home for their homework and they can access that content online, or maybe they have some reading to do, but a lot of times it's a video lecture or something that uses technology. And then they come back to school and they're able to apply that new learning in class. And one of the reasons it's such an interesting pedagogy is because, you think about the traditional approach and a student goes home, and if they don't understand what has happened in class, or they don't know how to apply it in a new context or apply it in their homework, who are they going to ask? I mean, then as a mother, when I'm asked, sometimes I don't know the answer. And also the student then is working on this work by themselves. So by flipping this approach, students are able to work with their peers as part of teams, and they're able to ask for help from the teacher while they're in school. So it's really an interesting thing. And what I found really interesting from the survey was that 57% of respondents said that their schools were already using this approach before the pandemic. So I think that makes it really easy in some respects to transition to the kind of blended learning or fully online learning that needed to happen over the past couple of years. So that I found quite interesting. I found also the frequency of use of project-based learning already quite interesting. project-based or problem-based learning, I think the report said something like 68% of respondents already say that they're using project-based and problem-based learning approaches. And these really marry really well with technology use. So, they can be connected to real-world scenarios. Students can solve real-world problems. They can, again, work as a team, which is fantastic. And one of the things that from some other research that I do around computer science education is that the use of problem-based and project-based learning is really helpful in terms of helping a variety of different diverse groups of learners become more interested in studying things like computer science and more technical subjects. Because, where you see that computer science and very techie subjects are often more appealing to boys, girls and other non-white boys, so to speak, are more apt to study those subjects when they understand kind of the reality of the problems they're trying to solve, so they can see why it's necessary to learn these skills to apply them to real world topics. And this works really with any subject. I used to teach English and grammar, and my 14-year-olds didn't understand why they had to learn to speak in a way that was different than their family and friends around them. And so understanding how to apply these concepts in real world scenarios is really important to develop kind of perspective of learners.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of people are talking about asynchronous these days, aren't they? And that kind of ties in my mind with flipped classrooms, which has been around for a long time, but perhaps is getting a lot more exposure now.
I found that very interesting. The one other thing that really made me happy in the results is that when respondents were asked what was the most likely impetus or catalyst for changes to teaching and learning over the last couple of years, very few said that it was because they changed teaching and learning because they purchased a new piece of technology. So it was like 16% or something. And for me, having worked in ed tech for so many years and having conversations where we keep saying to schools and teachers, it's not about the tech, it's about teaching and learning. So to understand that, your schools who responded to this really are making teaching and learning decisions because of teaching and learning, and they're not being driven by the tech. That to me represented kind of a shift, I think, in thinking, which was good.
It's that piece of kind of using tech for the sake of it versus using it for the general good of the students in the school, right?
Exactly. It's just another tool. It's like a textbook, except more powerful. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to slide number 3 then. So our report findings suggest that international schools have already been receptive to or in the process of change related to blended learning solutions. But COVID has been a catalyst for faster migration, which is interesting. But I think a lot of people would probably have agreed with that. If you'd asked them that, from whatever stance they have within the international education market. The report also suggests that what used to be considered best practice from a few of the top teachers in a school is now a standard in a school, which I found really interesting. Is this something you've noticed in your research?
I found so it's something that I have worked in the past with Michael Fallon and Andy Hargreaves, and one of the things that they talk about in terms of scaling education technology in particular is pockets of innovation. And so you can't just change something from the top down. You have to also change from the bottom up. And these little pockets of innovation, or these innovative teachers, are really quite important, especially if they're then able to mentor their peers and champion these things and gain acceptance throughout the school. But I absolutely loved hearing that in the report, that most of the changes from to teaching and learning in schools happen because of teachers who, I think the report said, actually have come back from professional development and learned something new, or they're new to the school. And I absolutely loved that. That was really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I found that interesting, for sure. Our survey results showed 51% of respondents will be moving towards a blended or hybrid approach within 2 years. I'm interested to know your thoughts about the 16% of schools that feel it's unlikely they'll move to a blended or hybrid model. Do you think these schools may well, I guess, suffer as a result of not moving with current developments? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, because the issue here is that in every country, and there's so much variation in terms of access to technology at home. So this could be, we don't know why these schools said this. So this could very well be those schools that, they know that their students don't have access to tech at home, or or they have to share it with brothers and sisters, or they don't have access to adequate internet. But the other thing is, they may not have a quiet place to work at home.
No, that's true.
I mean, you and I understand how difficult it is to have a quiet place to work at home, but you have to have a quiet place to work for everybody in your family. That's challenging. So we don't know why the 16% is. And I think that there's lots of countries now who are realizing kind of at a government policy level that this access issue is an issue. And they discovered it very quickly. And I've seen this in developed countries and developing countries. I mean, really, it does not discriminate. So I think, yes, it's possible that these schools and learners at these schools could get left behind, but to a certain extent, if the reasons they're not going to change is because of access, they're going to get left behind anyway. Because they're not getting that access to tech, and likely a lot of other advantages as well.
Absolutely. A question I wanted to ask you here is that, I've worked in Bahrain and Singapore and Kazakhstan now, where I'm currently based, and from my point of view, I've worked with a lot of teachers and known a lot of teachers, some of which I think would be perhaps very excited about getting back to offline learning, and some have really taken the bull by the horns and enjoyed what is hybrid and other forms of blended learning and what have you. Do you think that we'll see some teachers targeting schools who are either not interested so much or investing in hybrid, or who are super interested in investing in the hybrid approaches?
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, there's countries that I've worked with recently, kind of during the pandemic. What I'm seeing with teachers is that, and I actually just sat on a panel on the future of the teaching profession with the OECD. And one of the things that we talked about on that panel, kind of coming out of COVID and all of this, home remote learning, is rethinking the role of teaching altogether. So I do think that teachers, every teacher I have personally spoken to, and this is a small sample, but teachers are exhausted. They have been with technology, working kind of 24 hours a day. They've been, developing this new content online and delivering it, and then having to deal with those pupils who don't have access to it. And then, so they've been teaching the same thing several different ways and several different times a day in many cases. And so, I think there's going to be those teachers who found it really interesting and made and had an easier transition, and those teachers that just don't like it or just miss in-person teaching for other reasons, really. And I think also it's a lot easier. It's a lot more difficult, from what I've heard and teachers that I've spoken to, in early years. So those kinds of, when you're teaching young children to kind of be people and share and work together, and you really need to work with them one-on-one, I can see there being a difference in, early years versus secondary school, for example.
For sure. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So one of our survey questions is, what aspects of teaching and learning are your priorities for development over the next 2 years? And I think, understandably, given the year we've had, 68% of schools want to ensure community wellbeing as a major focus. And almost every school I've spoken to over the last year or so has said that wellbeing is a priority. Other feedback is that 49% of respondents saw a priority as reinforcing what's already being done surrounding teaching and learning. And I think much of that is a kind of a need to just secure the foundations of of what's being achieved. 66% of schools felt developing the need to enhance teacher tech skills was a priority. Are you surprised at all that percentage isn't higher, Kristen, given the drive to upskill faculties in this area?
I think I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. But I think there's more to it than that. So one of the data sets, when I worked on this report with ISC, I used to work at the OECD, as you said, and I led the Teaching and Learning International Survey, which is the world's largest survey of teachers. And I still have kept working on that even after leaving the OECD. And what the OECD has been asking since 2008 has been asking teachers for their biggest professional development needs. And the use of technology in teaching and learning is always either need number one or need number two. So it doesn't surprise me, and that's across countries basically. So that doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's 2/3 of teachers, and but I think it's more than just. I think it's more than just learning to use the technology. And so what we're finding and what the research is talking more about is typically when teachers attend initial teacher training, they learn about pedagogical knowledge, they learn about the content of the subject that they're going to teach, and they learn about the pedagogy of the subject they're going to teach. So, and what a lot of the research is talking about is a larger model that's called TPAC, which we mentioned in the report, but it's technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. And it's how all of those things intersect as well. So it's, technology for classroom management, technology with general pedagogy, technology with content, technology, all of these things. So you have to think of it more than, I would say, if we were thinking about the TPAC model, that percentage should be higher. And if we're just thinking about, I had a conversation with a school that I work really closely with, where I'm a governor, with their tech lead about the other day. And I said to her, please tell me how you're defining IT, because you just told me that all the students in the school are proficient in IT. And, these reception age students are not programming computers. So tell me what you mean by that. And I think, that's the other thing is the definition of ed tech. Is it just my students can use PowerPoint and Word and maybe send an email and they know how to be safe online, or, is it something broader?
So. I think there are so many different considerations to make as well. I'm sure more, perhaps more people are considering, priorities around tech for, upskilling teachers, but it wasn't one of their top two or so. So, I think feedback from this survey question in particular shows language and culture is becoming increasingly important as well within the international schools market. And this fits in line with the research that we're doing around a greater number of local students attending international schools. Do you think off the back of this, we're going to see a move to hiring more local staff as a result of these key drivers? Especially if we see visa restrictions certainly being slightly harder at the moment for schools.
Gosh, that's a very good question. I think in the immediate term, absolutely, with the lack of travel. And I think I would not be surprised if we see teachers leaving the profession because of the last couple of years that they've had. I think that's it's been quite stressful. And then if countries are unable to hire from outside of the country because of visa restrictions or because of travel restrictions, then yes, I think it could really change. Which is another interesting thing for international schools in particular.
I think having more locals in a school makes sense when culture and heritage are seemingly increasingly important, right? But I think there's obviously so many different things to focus on and think about there, before making a strategic decision change. But another of the questions within our survey was, what content does your teaching and learning incorporate? A point here I found interesting is that schools surveyed focusing on collaboration within industry the least, with only 20% saying they incorporate this into their teaching and learning. Do you expect industry collaboration to grow in the future with programs like the IBCP becoming increasingly popular, for example?
I think there is, it's funny because I worked in industry for 14 years. I worked for a big tech company and we worked with schools all the time. but sometimes there is a resistance in schools. I mean, there's kind of this fear, especially with big tech. I mean, I worked in big tech, and so I think it's challenging. I do think that there are so many opportunities for learners and for teachers to have more partnerships with schools. I used to work with a foundation in Brazil, where in particular they have kind of a different teaching and learning model altogether. But they encourage teachers, as part of the teaching and learning model, to bring in expertise from industry and from other areas, from research and academia as well, because the teacher can't be expected to know everything.
Yeah.
And so I think the opportunity of that hybrid and online learning provides, where, these experts, if we're just thinking of people coming in as experts, they wouldn't have to physically come to the school. You could access them online and partner with industry in that way. It gives students a better understanding of what it's like to work in those kinds of situations. It gives them access to content that they wouldn't have from the teachers, or not necessarily have from the teachers, and so that it just exposes them to so much more. So that kind of a partnership is really interesting. The way that I used to work was, providing things like content and resources and training and all of that. And I do think, regardless of how people feel about big tech or industry in general, there is access to so much out there for schools that's just not being taken up.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
And it's so, if you have the time to search for it, there's funding, there's resources, there's kit, there's all sorts of there's all sorts of things, training that's free, that is high quality. So it's good to look for those kinds of things and not be afraid, I think.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And I think personally, from my point of view, I think we'll see a greater drive towards industry collaboration in the future, but perhaps not right now. And that's probably why the percentage was a bit lower.
Yeah.
So let's talk about influences impacting change there. So COVID-19 has been an obvious change agent for over 50% of international schools, which many would consider makes sense. 39% of respondents said that distance learning requirements during campus closures have been the major influence for their school to shift towards a more blended learning approach. And then 26% said the need to improve student engagement has been the greatest catalyst to change. Listening to thought leaders discussing the benefits associated with independent learning and the need to improve student engagement, I would have personally assumed that personalised approaches would have received more schools selecting this as an influence, with only 13% placing personalisation of learning at first or second on the list. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts were surrounding that one, Kristen.
I was really surprised by that as well, actually. I was very surprised, because this is such a buzzword these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you hear about it all the time. And even in terms of just differentiation of instruction and how challenging that can be when you have a class of 32 learners from different backgrounds. I wondered, actually, is this because of the audience? Is this, are international schools stronger in this area than kind of the average school anyway? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it definitely surprised me, this finding.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I was considering the same thing. I think it's again, it might just be that other things have been more of a precedent right now, and it's kind of there, but not quite first or second on the list. But from what we're hearing, individualized pathways are certainly an area of interest. So quick fire one for you then, Kristen. What would you suggest to be the top 3 reasons schools are looking to offer a blended or hybrid learning model post-COVID?
I think flexibility is one. So because students can learn kind of anytime, anywhere. And it also offers more flexibility, I think, for teachers as well. I was speaking to some teachers in France, which is not actually, and this is just the French state school system, but it's not known for being really tech savvy and tech forward. And they were employing, they found use of blended learning models really helpful to help them work with groups of students who needed extra help, where they could have other students doing independent learning at the same time. And so that kind of helping with differentiation of instruction, I think, is another use of blended learning. I'm trying to think of a third. I think there's a number, but I don't know if a number of other reasons, but I don't know if I would pick any of them as third. I think one of the things in some cases, the involvement of parents is really helpful. So for example, and this maybe isn't so much blended or hybrid learning, but one of the things that I've heard in a lot of different countries is that you always have those parents who just don't want to come into school. Maybe they work a lot. They can't get there easily. They can't get babysitters. They didn't have a good experience with school themselves. So you just can't get kind of that same group of parents to come in and talk to teachers. They don't attend the parents' evenings or whatever. And what I've heard is, as things like parent-teacher conferences have moved online, a lot of schools are just getting higher attendance and higher involvement from parents. Because they don't have all those barriers. And so, this is kind of on the side of blended learning, but it's one of the ways that, things that we learned, that we had to do in COVID are now practices that might continue because they've actually worked quite well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I hadn't considered that from as an answer to this question, but I think that's a really valid point. I was also thinking about kind of like, the fear of going back into lockdown and this forming part of a crisis management strategy. But I think the 3 points that you've made are really, really interesting ones, actually. So moving forward, so for many international schools, teachers play an important part in deciding future teaching and learning models for their schools. So you'll be able to see on the slide, and for those again on the audio, 64% said their teachers are very or quite influential when it comes to proposing change. Another 28% are occasionally influential. So Kristen, what do you think, or what did you kind of discover when researching the influence teachers in international schools have towards change in the schools approach to teaching and learning?
So I thought that this was really positive, actually, because if we lump together very influential and quite influential, that's a majority of respondents, and saying that teachers are so influential. So this to me is great for many reasons. So if I go back to the TALIS OECD data, we asked teachers about how their involvement in school level decisions, and have found over the years, and a lot of other academic research backs this up, that teachers who were involved in school level decisions report higher rates of job satisfaction. They report higher rates of self-efficacy, so confidence in their own abilities as teachers, which is linked and has been linked to student achievement as well. And they report feeling that teaching as a profession is more valued by their society. So all of these things are so helpful to the individual teacher in terms of their own happiness and likelihood to stay teaching at that school, and their own confidence and the way they teach, but then also to the teaching profession as a whole in terms of the ability to attract and retain high quality teachers, and to the school in terms of their ability, the culture and the leadership at that school that involves teachers in school level decisions. So for me, this is nothing but positive. And, I would encourage any schools that aren't involving teachers in school level decisions to see how you can do that, because it's just has so many benefits at a school and teacher level.
And I'm not a teacher. I'm kind of working in research, but I think even outside of the teaching industry, I think offering buy-in to members of staff in their kind of field will only add to their enjoyment of their role, because they feel they have some kind of autonomy. So I can see that. A question from me here when I'm looking at these statistics is, I wonder whether teachers having an influence is impacted in any way by the curriculum on offer or by the location of the school. Is that the trend you saw at all?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And I think what you said about teacher autonomy is linked to that as well, because in some respects, teachers can only have as much autonomy as the school system allows. And I've done some research and publications about teachers, thinking of teachers as knowledge workers and teaching as a knowledge worker profession, a knowledge profession. And, one of the things that people who work in industry as knowledge workers, they have autonomy. They're trusted in terms of their own experience and expertise to make decisions, to solve problems. And if you have, as an education system, mandated everything, I mean, I've visited countries where teachers literally need to be on the same page of the textbook at the same time as the teacher in the next town. Then kind of anybody can do that. You're not looking at a professional to deliver that really at that point. And so I think you're absolutely right. If you have a really rigid curriculum and a really rigid structure within the school, then there's only so much teachers can do. But I always encourage, and this is one of the recommendations that the OECD always give as well, that teachers should be treated as professionals. They should be able to make changes to teaching and learning materials and the curriculum in their own class, following curriculum guidelines of a national curriculum. Fine, but they should be able to make those changes based on their learners.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suspected that the same as what you've just mentioned there. So that's in line with my thoughts as well. Moving on to the survey question, what is driving your teachers to change teaching and learning models? Top of the list surveyed responses was, as you can see on the slide there, 73% being professional development. From your perspective, what are the specific ways schools are enhancing their pedagogical offering through professional development? And I think you mentioned flipped classrooms and asynchronous already, right? So I wonder if they would have fit within your answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends, but I think like I've worked with schools that have been concerned about their assessment or marking, and so they send teachers off, or they have someone come in to talk about new ways of marking student work or new ways of assessment, and then they kind of change that, or they're worried about student results in maths, for example, and so they adopt a new way of teaching math, and everybody across the school teaches it the same way, or whatever. So I've seen that kind of work where it's kind of tied to the school's development plan or whatever for the year, and priorities for the year, and so then professional development falls in line with that. But for me, I found this really interesting because it really hit home kind of the importance of professional development, first of all, but the importance of quality professional development. Because one of the other things that I've seen come out of COVID is, teachers, if they had time during the past 2 years to dedicate to professional development, had to access it online. And, that's great, because especially I imagine for teachers in international schools, they probably do a lot of that already, accessing online professional development, but it gives them so much more professional development that they can have access to. So rather than what they can just go see, in person nearby, it removes a lot of barriers, just like the barriers for parents I was talking about earlier, travel to a in-person professional development offering, having to do it at a certain time, etc. But because there's so many more opportunities available, what struck me when I looked at the kind of importance of professional development here is that it becomes more and more difficult to, especially for an individual teacher, I think, to ascertain which ones are high quality and kind of how do they know.
For sure.
And if you're saying here, if the respondents are saying that 73% of them said that they adopt new teaching and learning models based on professional development, and their teachers have attended not very good professional development, then what kind of changes are they making?
Absolutely. It needs, I suppose, a clear understanding of the best PD options out there is certainly necessary, right?
Exactly. It's tough. I mean, one of the things that's in one of the recommendations, I think, in the report are kind of widely agreed characteristics of high quality professional development. And it's really important to kind of embed that in decision making around professional development, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think mixed teacher demographics, i.e. age, nationality and experience, and then sharing good practice was seen as key to driving change in teaching and learning in our survey as well. What can schools do to develop a broad teacher mix and an environment where teachers have autonomy to share, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is the kind of leadership culture at the school. So, you know, who is being hired, where are they coming from? I think this is an area where international schools have an advantage because teachers, you know, there's some research that just came out actually in the US talking about how teachers, you know, are most likely to take teaching jobs really close to where they attended their initial teacher training. And that, of course, doesn't happen in international schools as much. And so it's you really are more likely to get a more diverse workforce, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But in terms of then the school leadership creating a culture where teacher collaboration is safe and encouraged, and teachers have time to collaborate. Teachers have time to observe other teachers teach, because that in itself is an amazing form of professional development, just observing one of your colleagues teach and then providing feedback. And in fact, it's if I go back again to the OECD research, it's something that is really highly connected again to teacher job satisfaction and self-efficacy, but it's also not very frequently performed. So I think in the OECD research, only 9% of teachers around the world report observing their colleagues teach and providing feedback at least once a month.
Yeah.
So, but that is, you know, that's your free professional development right there.
Yeah, I guess it moves on to one of your points in the report around mentoring for all, right?
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, mentoring is typically, and I think the report or the data also from ISC also said that, you know, mentoring is used by these schools, but primarily I think for new teachers or for targeted needs. And if all teachers have access to mentor, I mean, every teacher can learn something new, especially if you think of those experienced teachers that may not be very familiar with using tech, or there's any number of things. But mentor teachers, the mentors benefit just as much as the mentees if the work is done correctly. So there's tons of research on the benefits of mentoring, and there was another study from the US that just came out recently that said that teachers who receive more mentoring also have students that get higher achievement levels. So it really is mentoring is something that can really benefit everybody.
More mentoring for everyone then, I think.
More mentoring for everyone. Yes, exactly.
So quick one from me here then. Do you think there's a curriculum which has been adapted or which has adapted the quickest and most seamlessly to the current teaching and learning expectations?
I don't know if I can answer that question, actually. I don't know if I have enough information to answer that question. I think that if I'm speaking generally, I have seen challenges when the curricula are less flexible.
Yes. Yeah.
So if there is a really rigid curriculum, teachers just don't understand how new tools or new pedagogies can fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that in some European countries I've been working with in terms of technology, where I was working with a startup who had a really interesting adaptive product, and the teachers loved it, but they couldn't make the transition as to when they should use it because their curriculum was so structured.
Yeah, absolutely.
So go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was thinking about kind of like the IB having inquiry-based learning, problem solving, and risk taking, and those things you kind of associate with what we're looking at within hybrid and blended learning strategies at the moment. And so I was kind of thinking maybe that's the curriculum which would have adapted easiest, but then I'm sure there are other reasons why perhaps it's been harder for them as well. So
yeah, I mean, could be, but I think you're right, because those kinds of inquiry-based, problem-based, project-based, that lends itself really well to tech. It, lends itself, could lend itself really well to distance learning. So I think I think that could have worked quite well. Yeah.
All right, well, I will move on to the next section now. So this covers the emergence of new roles and likely changes within teaching and learning within the international school sector. So 41% of survey respondents said that their international school has a leader entirely dedicated to teaching and learning, and 37% say they have appointed a new tech-focused teaching and learning leadership role in the last 2 years. So we see growth of leadership roles dedicated to teaching and learning, and increasingly dedicated to tech-focused teaching and learning emerging within the international schools sector. These roles have grown by 37% of respondent schools within the last 2 years. So would this figure be, do you think, significantly lower had the pandemic not have occurred? My assumption is it would be, but I mean, I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are, Kristen.
Yeah, I think you might be right, because I think the pandemic was such a catalyst to, all of us who've been working in ed tech for so many years. This was just like the gift in terms of ed tech. This was a gift that will never come again or whatever. But and one of the things we need to think about is how to take advantage of the good things that that came out of distance learning in the pandemic. And I think this is one of those good things. Prior to the pandemic, when I was working at UCL Institute of Education, one of the things I worked on was helping schools understand how to make evidence-based decisions on purchasing tech. And what you get in schools, if you're lucky enough as a school to have a technology director of some sort, until the pandemic, I think a lot of those people were either just solely tech focused, if they were a tech director, or maybe you had a classroom teacher who was so busy with the regular classroom teaching duties, and maybe they had some time to devote to tech. But I worked with a really large school in West London who was very, very tech savvy. And one of the things I worked with them on was how to understand what tech was at the school and how that could align with the priorities, the teaching and learning priorities that the school had, to understand where new tech possibly was needed.
Yeah.
And you have a group of teachers and the tech director, and the group of teachers say, well, we have these priorities, so we need tech that does this, and this. And the tech director is saying, well, we already have that tech, and nobody uses it. Or this feature of this product does that, and you didn't even know that. So the school was able to kind of save themselves, a lot of money from but to a certain extent, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because there isn't that connection between tech purchasing and tech use, and so I think that kind of a role is going to be just nothing but beneficial for the school.
Kind of acting as an integration between teachers and tech.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Moving forward then, so looking to the future, 19% of surveyed respondents will introduce new leadership roles around teaching and learning in the coming 2 years. So I'm sure that makes you happy after the comments you just made. So what are you able to deduce from this research about the way international schools are embracing change?
Well, I was really impressed by this. I mean, I think that it seems like international schools are pretty flexible and are looking. I mean, I was just on this meeting recently where a researcher said to think about the pandemic almost like when you're packing to go on holiday, or you're packing to move the house. Like, what are you going to bring with you? What do you absolutely need? So what I saw when I looked at this research is international schools doing that, thinking, okay, what did we learn over the last 2 years that we want to bring with us, and where do we need more information? I think they're making some really interesting changes that will keep the schools flexible and moving forward, and benefit from what we've learned the last couple of years, and the good things about what's happened.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. Now this is quite a broad question, but what is the impact of recent changes within teaching and learning on assessment and on the accessibility of learning for all children?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting. There's big assessment questions happening. I mean, I'm based in the UK, and in England, there's big assessment questions happening.
Yeah.
And as more technology, is available and used in schools, there's definitely, and new ways of teaching, you kind of have to think then about, when you have new ways of teaching, are you teaching new things? How are you going to assess those things?
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be high level conversations about assessment. So are all these high stakes exams the best way to measure some of the skills and competencies that students need? If we're not talking about them needing to regurgitate knowledge, but applying knowledge, is really sitting down and taking a big exam the best way to do that? But I think the other thing that I've noticed a lot of countries, actually through another big project I'm working on, a lot of governments are noticing is that there is so much data that's being collected by all this increased use of technology.
Yeah.
And that they want to understand how to make use of these data to provide a better picture of each individual child, at a school level, of a school as a whole, and of a system as a whole. And so how do countries at a country level connect these different silos of data that they have, and then how do schools do the same type of thing to understand what's going on with each of their students, and how do teachers take advantage of different ways to collect and use and visualize data to help change their teaching practice on the fly? How do they look at this real-time data that's coming in all the time? So I think that's quite interesting.
I think we're definitely at a fork in the road, aren't we? There's change coming in a big way, I would suggest.
Yeah.
In this area in particular. So we've touched upon this a few points through the session, but I wonder if you could give us a bit of an overview of the recommendations that you've made in the report and the reasons for your choices. I think you've got 5 recommendations, if I'm not mistaken, in the report, right?
Yes, I think so. So I think, let me just think about them. So I think some of them you're right, I have touched on already. So like encouraging teachers to be a part of school-based decisions or school-level decisions. So that's a really important one. I'm just trying to remember all my recommendations here at the top of my head.
You on the spot.
Exactly.
Mentoring was in there.
Yes, mentoring was another one. I talked about schools making use of online professional development offerings, which we also touched on, which does absolutely remove some of the barriers, but then to accessing professional development. But it, you do, as I said, need to consider quality of the professional development offerings. One of the things that I mentioned about all of the skills that teachers really need to teach in a blended learning environment, which is not just tech skills, but understanding pedagogy and understanding things like the best communication or discipline in an online environment. Those kinds of things are and creating content for online learning is something that's different than creating in-person content. And mentoring, we talked about mentoring already, making mentoring available to all teachers. And then I think we just talked about the last one, just in terms of the data.
I think
and
the
understanding,
point on that one, from my point of view, is part of it was that 53% of schools are not recording data via online tracking tools. So I was kind of thinking that macro analysis, it will be very challenging for those schools, and that must be a big area of potential change over the coming couple of years.
Yeah, I think it is challenging because honestly, this isn't something that's covered, I would say, in most initial teacher training programs. Understanding how to absorb and use data. But I think it's something that the companies that are creating the products that are collecting data really need to be cognizant of as well. And that is, creating data dashboards with teachers so that and making them have the ability to be interconnected so that it's easy for schools to connect all the different data sources in a way that teachers can easily visualize the data that they need and understand then how to use data to change their teaching practice.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, you know, our listeners will have found the advice you've just given with regards to recommendations and within the report really valuable. So it's well worth reading through those, you know, more detailed recommendations. So I think my last question for you here then, and it's a bit of a random one, but I was just thinking about this and I was thinking, NQT is going to be more desirable in the future due to current training methods and their organic understanding of tech, do you think?
I think that depends on, I mean, yes, that's possible.
Yeah.
If we assume that NQTs are more tech savvy, possibly.
Yeah.
But I think a lot is dependent on, you know, the system of initial teacher training and what happens there. And if some of these new pedagogies, or some of these pedagogies that maybe weren't as popular are included in initial teacher training, along with tech, along with, you know, hybrid blended learning, all this stuff that may not be in a lot of the, you know, traditional teacher preparation courses. And it's really tough because you know, a lot of initial teacher training is done at universities, and universities are kind of their own entities. It's really tough to reform initial teacher education. So I think that's going to be kind of the next place to look, really.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great answer. Kind of, I hadn't thought about it quite so. You know, I've probably been thinking about it from a purely, you know, linear perspective. There are many other pieces to the puzzle, right? With
Yeah,
that one.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, well, so thank you so much for taking the time to not only be involved with the TNL report through, you know, your research and analysis and then writing, Kristen, but also for sharing your insights with us in our first ever Heads Up series today. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to chat through and answer some of my questions. And I think, as I mentioned just now, listeners will certainly have got a lot out of that. To all listeners, once you have a minute, you can download the report at iscforschools.com/teaching and learning. And if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch with myself, and I can do my best to answer the questions that you posed me. So again, thanks to Education Horizons Group for sponsoring. Hopefully see you all soon for more Heads Up sessions in the future. Thanks again and take care.
Thanks, Sam.